Thank you all for having me and Jane and all who were involved in this invite. I really appreciate you. And thank you for actually this coaching interview. I've been hearing about it for some time, but I had another group I was attending on a Saturday. So then that kind of shifted his dates a little bit. So I said, well, let me go out there. Dean talked to me about it. I said, let me go see what's going on. I've been coming ever since. But I've been here, so it's just a wonderful weekend. And I really appreciate you, appreciate how you embraced me when I came. I was not a stranger when I walked through the door today. And that's rare. Now, just have people, and it takes a while. People just kind of warm and kind of look at you with change eye. And before at some point, people start saying, okay, he's okay, we've been here for a little bit, so we're gonna go ahead. But no, not with this one. So I really do appreciate it. I'll talk this morning about my testimony as such, but my testimony actually is a testimony of God's grace throughout my life. And I really want to focus in on that, God's grace in my life. Matthew 6:33 says, but first and most importantly, seek, aim at, strive after God's kingdom and his righteousness, his way of doing and being right, the attitude and character of God. Hebrews 12 says this, looking away from all that will distract, focusing our eyes on Jesus, who is the author and perfecter of faith. So my testimony is one of God's grace and constantly kind of nudging me to look away from all the other things that are happening on the earth. That was so easy for me. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. Grew up in what was called the projects. It wasn't called the project, but it was a project. It was government warehouse, and it was tough. And we like to say all the time, people say, well, how did you grow up? I said, we grew up poor, not poor. There's another level. We grew up poor. And growing up that way, having nothing, seeing everything that everybody else had, but having nothing, you kind of start getting the impression that we kind of left out. We had no dreams, no aspirations. No one talked to us about what do you want to do when you grow up. Nobody talked about that kind of stuff. You just kind of made your way through life the best you could. My dad had served in the military, but he got medical discharge because of epilepsy. So I didn't know all of that until actually after he died. We were able to get the birth certificate. And I looked on it and I said, wait a minute, he spent time overseas. He was in the military. I said, yeah. And he was in the army. So I have that legacy coming from my dad. But this may sound a little weird to you, but when I was a kid, before I came to Christ, almost every night had this tree. And all I saw was this figure in the gold. Bright light all the way around me, but it was just this figure standing in the door. And I had no idea what it was, but it scared me. And I fought to wake up every night. I had no idea what that was all about. But I'm going to tell you that when I accepted Christ and I saw where that scripture was in Revelation, I never had that to the beginning. And I saw then that God was calling me out of darkness, but I had no awareness. We all know people like that. God's calling them out of darkness, but they have no awareness what that is all about. And that was me. I was one who went to church, even when I joined the military, went to chapel. But if I heard someone give the gospel, I missed it big time because I don't remember anyone talking about Jesus Christ. But it was back then in the 70s, for the most part, chapels were professionals. That was their occupation. occupation. It wasn't necessarily their identity. So I didn't hear anybody preaching the gospel. I thought I was good with God. Anybody here that would think that they were just good with God? I didn't know that that was another step. The next step was Jesus Christ, but I never heard. So I thought I was good with God. So back up a second. I have 12 siblings. I had 12 siblings. 7 of them had died. So you can understand why we were a little short in the payroll. We grew up in St. Louis. When my dad died, we kind of got rebellious. Dad kept us all in check. He was rough. Today, it would be called abuse. Right. That's the back then, good dad. Keeps his children in check. When he died, we kind of rebelled a little bit. Poor mom. I still apologize today for mom having to trying to raise 13 kids. Well, we went out in the streets. We hung out. Back then, it wasn't necessarily called gangs, but it was gangs. Hung out together. We fought people across the street. They came across. They fought us. I had friends who died. One was a very good friend. We saw it when it happened. He was kind of the ringleader, tough guy. Everybody had respect for him, except for the guy that showed up to shoot. And he chased after the guy, and because of that, I could say that the bullet started moving. That was the kind of life we were living out in the streets. But then, what happened was God called me out of St. Louis because I had a very good friend in high school who joined the military. He came home and he was talking about the military, talking about how great everything was. Of course, you know, when they're giving those testimonies, they only give them the good parts. Talking about how great everything was. Right. And so what I did, I had a good job. I was working for Austin Spring Companies in St. Louis. Work study program in my senior year in high school. After that, they brought us on to work. So I was moving up, had a couple of promotions while I was there, but then that bug, when he started talking, there was just something in me that wanted that too. So I joined the Army. And after basic training and advanced individual training, I wanted to get out. And not because I knew very much about the Army, is because basic training, that's something always going on. You got the adrenaline rush. They actually something always going on. You got the adrenaline rush. When I got to my first day station, I was bored. I wanted to go back home. But I had a commander, and I went to talk to him. He said, "You signed up. You ain't going." Right. He had no idea where he was going. And I never looked to get out after that. I actually had no idea I was going to stay in for 21 years. No, that wasn't the plan. My plan was to get out after that first initial enlistment. 21 years later, I was still in the military and retired. So that was that part. But my life happened in those stages, those first 20 years, St. Louis, the next 20, 21 years in the military, being young and dumb and in Europe. I have to tell you this one story of God's grace. That's why I say select of God's grace. I'm in the military in Germany, in the club, late at night, driving from the club back to the base, to the post. Drunk as a skunk, in a Volkswagen. And this is the windshield in the Volkswagen, and I'm doing this. All over the place. The grace of God that I didn't kill somebody, kill myself, wreck the vehicle, and I would have spent a totally different life during the jail. That was a grace. Wish I could tell you that cured me of drinking and all that. It didn't. But I was young and dumb, thinking I knew what life was about. Anybody here ever? Anybody ever been young and dumb? Just me. Oh, wow. And I have a greater testimony than I thought I had. But anyway, during that 20-year phase, again, I was not born again. I was a young man, a young specialist in the military, and again, had this God thought. When you become sergeant first class, I was in 94 specialist at that time. When you become a sergeant first class, you apply for warrant officer. Okay, that makes no sense whatsoever to me. I had no idea what warrant officers were. Had no idea what that thought came. Totally forgot. In the meantime, I accepted the call. Went through the process, getting promotions, became a sergeant first class. Then God came back and says, now I want you to apply. And I immediately remembered when that thought came to me several years prior, 4, 5, 6, 7 years prior. I immediately remembered God said to me, when you become a sergeant first class, you're apply for that. Me being smart and still dumb. So God, I don't want to do that because they have, at that time, you had to sit in front of the board of people who drilled you with questions. I said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to sit in front of a board of people. No, thank you. Now, personal administration, all of my military life. I got the regulations, I got the changes. The change came down almost immediately the next day. That said, no more boards are required. And I don't know how God talks to you, but in him I heard, now what's your excuse? So I said, okay. At that point, I got smart. Okay. So I did that, and something else happened that really never really happened. I got selected the first time around. Never happened again. But by the grace of God. I can't take any credit for it. I can't predict one. Because it was by the grace of God. When I see these things happening like this, there's no way I can take any credit whatsoever. But it's by the grace of God. I became a warrant officer and continued in my military career. That was, the military was that second 20 years. So I joined at 20 and went to San Antonio, one of the assignments, and met my wife there in San Antonio, Texas, Fort Sam, Houston. At some point, then we came down on assignment. By the grace of God, we both were assigned to Hawaii. We both. That's where we actually wound up getting married. And our first daughter. And she still says today, we were babies from Hawaii. Say, well, I think it's a little bit more than just being born in a military hospital. But she will tell you that today, and she's at 45 years old. So, praise God. But in that military career, God began to use me in other ways. Because after I accepted Christ, then he also called me to ministry. And I began to work as a lay minister in the chapel. That was another grace thing because that's not something that actually happens either. A slot opens up for you to be in the chapel. So, and I was not a chaplain. As I said, I was personnel administration inside for you. So I'm over there in the chapel, conducting services, have no clue what I'm doing. Have no clue what I'm doing. But I relied on God. I said, well, God brought me here, so forth. I'm going to continue to rely on Him because I have no idea. Was I perfect in it? By no means. That's what I made a lot of mistakes. You know, when you make mistakes later on, you think about, why can I take that? Can I do a do-over? And the do-over is you learn from the mistakes. So I learned from those mistakes. God worked mightily in those services in the chapel. Had a good relationship with the chaplain at that time. And a lot of conversations with him. God sent a mentor while I was there, and he was a grumpy old Vietnam vet. No disrespect to any grumpy old Vietnam vet, but he was a grumpy old. But he was good for me. Took me under his wings. He watched out for me, taught me, because he was also a pastor on the German economy in a local German church. He had married a local. And so they invited me in, talked with me. I visited their congregation, shared with them, and it was just a blessing. Without that, I wouldn't have had any clue what to do. But God always has a ram in the bush.
Right, right.
When we think this is it, this is gonna die, God's got a ram in the bush. And he sent that grumpy old Vietnam vet who became a very good mentor. To the point that several years later I got word, lost contact with him several years later, I got word. And that hit me hard because I knew what it meant to be a knight. So God worked through these 20 years. It was by His grace. After the 21 years of military, in actuality, it should have just been 20 years. Should have just been 20 years. I put in my retirement paper at 20. Hadn't signed, hadn't approved. Then something happened. I came down on the promotion list for CW3. Guess what I did? I withdrew the retirement papers, took that other year, took that promotion, and immediately was sent to Korea. Without my family, there without my family, whatever. Looking around, fantastic place. I wish my family could have been there. But I was there these 6 months without my family. And then the opportunity came to get an early retirement. Because normally you're there for 6 months. Thank the grace of God. My wife and I were on the phone and we were talking about, we had that 6-month break. We talked about me coming home. And I just, again, got that prompting. I said, well, just ask God. I said, God, is it okay for us to ask you if we can come home? If I can come home in that 6 months. And again, the prompting that I got was, yes, but it's going to cost you. I told my wife that, and she said, no, we're not going to do that. Whatever that means, we're not going to do it. If God says it's going to cost you, we ain't going to do that. So, we did. That's when the paper came. Remember, I'm the first bill. The paper came down that they had an early retirement program, and I was eligible. I wound up going home at the same time that I was scheduling to go home, but on the government's dime.
Amen.
Isn't God good? It's the grace of God jumping around and leaving so much out, but the point that I want to make is but by the grace of God. My life is defined by God's grace, not what I did, not so much what others did for me, but what God orchestrated in my life. This kid coming out of St. Louis, coming out of the projects in St. Louis with no dreams, no aspirations, winding up being a warrant officer in the military, winding up being called a pastor, getting the credentials for that, going to school for that, winding up getting a master's degree, winding up eventually after I retired from the pastor, from the pulpit, getting a doctorate degree. Nobody would have ever been able to tell me. I cannot take credit for that. I'm just not smart enough. But I would sit there for hours. Sit there for hours. Thinking out, okay, God, you got me into this. You're going to have to help me. The instructors did all they could. But the rest is on us. And in my case, it's on me and God. And that's exactly what happened. So in that first phase, St. Louis, second phase, the military, the third phase was the pastorate. Called to ministry. We got called out of Waynesville, Missouri to Jefferson City, Missouri to pioneer a church. Again, I had no idea what I was doing. No idea. I didn't have this group of people who gathered around me saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do that. I found out that people actually did that and had them later on when you get a little bit smarter. But prior to that, I said, okay, wasn't smart enough to go look for a group of people to help me to do that. But I trusted God in His grace, and He sent people to gather around me, to guide me, to direct me. After I got out of the military, my wife and I, we uprooted everything we knew. Again, we back one step. When I had that nudge to go to Jefferson City, pastor church, me being smart, I decided I was going to challenge God. I said, okay, it's really you. Show me in your word where you sent somebody somewhere and they had no idea where they were going. They never did. And it was quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
God didn't wait a second. What I heard was Genesis chapter 12. Yeah. I didn't even have to go look it up.
Yeah.
By that time, I had studied the Bible enough that I knew what Genesis 12 was. Abraham. Guess what I did? Okay.
Yeah.
Can I tell you that it won't work trying to challenge God? He already knows the end from the beginning. He already knows your question. He already knows the answer. But He knows us well enough that if we pursue Him, that we're going to do it. That's what I try to tell people. Who say, well, how did you last so long? I wasn't smart enough to say no to God. Or maybe I was smart enough not to say no to God. That was that. That's better. We pastored there in Jefferson City for 26 years. 26 years. Became a part of that community because we really believed God wanted us to be a part of the entire community, not just focus on a local congregation, but to be a part of the entire community. So we got involved with prison ministry there. Did that for 25 years. Helped establish the Pregnancy Health Center. Did that for full time once we established that 10, 11 years, and it's still going now. Got involved with addiction, the addiction community. So there was an addiction beds, housing right down the road from where we had our church. So we got involved with that. They invited us in. They actually lost money by inviting us in. Why? Because the government wasn't going to pay for any religious program. So they said, we don't care. But by the grace of God, give you this too, that when God calls us to do something, we don't have to rely on man to make it happen.
Right.
In each one of these cases, I didn't try to kick down a door. God opened it. I walked in. It became that easy. I mean, literally, it became that easy. But when God opened the door, He opened the door to the prisons. He opened the door to establish that Ferguson Health Center. He opened the door for the addiction center. He opened the door to establish uh, recovery house, 2 recovery houses. He opened those doors. And it made all the difference in the world. Those 26 years went by faster than we thought on some days. Other days, we go by faster than nothing. One thing we did not know, pastoring is not easy. We just saw these guys on television and everybody shouting and waving their hand and saying, Hosanna, Hosanna. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. The only problem was Jesus did that entry, but then at some point they began to question and saying, what meaneth this? Who gave you this word to speak? How dare you? And then at the end, what did they say? Crucify him. Crucify him. That sounds kind of familiar. That kind of happened with us. So we began to ask the Lord to we asked him to give us permission to see our grandkids raised here in Oklahoma. God said yes. We sent someone for us to transition church. We went through that process, came here 4 years ago, and loving our grandkids. They're wearing this out, but we're loving our grandkids. 3 years old, 4 years old, and 6 years old. They're wearing us out. Yeah. We told our son, you want us to keep the kids all the time. You realize that your parents are old. It's your fault. You waited that long. But we can't run around with them like we could have 10 years ago. But anyway, we love our grandkids and we love the opportunity to see them grow and expand. So now we're enjoying retirement life, twice retired, one kingdom, the grace of God, the mercy of God, the faith of God. And as I said, so many other things that happen in there and can't really talk about everything, good, bad, you know. All of our lives are like good things, good bad things, but there's things, ugly things. But the good news is God's grace is us through it. His grace. Paul said in 1 Corinthians, when God said to him, my grace is sufficient. And I hold on to it. The grace of God is sufficient. And we'll close with this. When we got here 4 years ago, after we were so involved in community justice, we didn't get it. That we didn't have a day that we went to go to something. We got here. That was a tough first year. Tough first year, just city. The city, that was tough. We tried doing other things. I was running around some other way. Those doors were not open. I was smart enough to know at that point, don't try to keep them. And I did. This way. Then eventually God started opening doors, and now I'm serving with the USO. I'm really loving it. As a fact, Sunday, we're going to be hosting the Super Bowl party with September. And we are loving it. We are looking forward to it. You crazy? The Super Bowl's on at the time. One, the Chiefs not in it. I don't care. But two, for 20-something years, I was doing prison ministry. On Super Bowl Sunday, we were opening the prison. Why? Because people need us. I learned you better go with people. Yes. That's what it means when you say going hard. You go with people who need you. Not where you come from. People who need you. And the grace of God will keep you and direct you. Remember, not just for young folks. I'm 73, and God's still telling me to go.
Amen.
Abraham was how old? 75, I believe. And he's still 75. So when God speaks to me about that, well, I'm retired now. I am retired in those 2 jobs. But I still have a job to do. God's retirement plan is much better. Thank you all so much for having me and allowing me to share the tidbits what I do with the grace. Thank you.